Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm afraid I bring probably the least experience and relevant life to this debate of anyone so far. 3 years lecturing to postgraduate students doesn't qualify me as a teacher, that's for sure. I'm not a dad, so I have nothing there. But on the other hand, I have 9 great-nephews and nieces, a goddaughter, and 7 nephews and nieces. So I've got some exposure to it. And just picking up on Daniel Johnson saying, you know, a multiple-choice test to be stressful. Well, believe me, I've found it quite stressful standing beside my goddaughter when she was not yet 3 with a Portsoy ice cream shop gift voucher in her hand, and we were experiencing the multiple choice between the 32 brands of ice cream that were there as we went through and made choices. Actually, that illustrates, I think, a general point that developing skills starts very early. And by the time you get to 5, I think every child has gone through many multiple choice examinations. They just aren't in the academic sector. There's nothing unfamiliar about being presented with choices. Now, I just give that as an illustration of how we may all be guilty of overplaying some of the issues that there are here. I also, in early stage of the debate, but it's been remedied later, in particular by Alison Harris, the early speakers made comparatively little mention of the children. And I think we should put the children at the centre of the debate, rather than perhaps putting the teachers at the centre of the debate. But clearly the teachers are not unimportant, and neither are the parents. That's for absolutely sure. But, Presiding Officer, the real thing that there is in this debate is the Conservatives to change their mind, and they are entitled so to do. I have occasionally changed my mind, and my political colleagues have occasionally changed their mind as well. There is nothing wrong with that. If new information comes along, then new conclusions can reasonably be reached. But the real question is, what is the Tory position about testing overall? And that takes me back to my intervention on Liz Smith at the very first contribution to this debate. Because south of the border, they are moving in a very different direction, the Tories. The new reception baseline assessment will be statutory for all pupils in England from September 2020. And that is for the reception class. In other words, at kindergarten before you get to primary school. But it's also coupled with testing in the first year of primary school and testing in the second year of primary school south of the border. Now, the National Foundation for Educational Research has said, our experience in producing a reception baseline demonstrated it's possible to undertake a robust assessment of children's language, literacy and numeracy skills at this age. In other words, 4, 5 or 6. And I think we should hold on to that expert advice. Indeed, they go on to say it's vitally important to the lasting and significant change that parents and teachers be provided with transparent and consistent information. And that's what the Tories are introducing in England. They've bluntly tried to disconnect the Tories in Scotland from that and take a different position. But it is one Tory party, so I'm not at all clear on what basis we should properly look. Yes, I will.
Mr Stevenson, I have to say there's a lot of opposition to the concerns of what's happening in south of the border for exactly the same reasons that there are concerns up here.
Stewart Stevenson.
It's quite interesting that the Tories, therefore, I have a confession here, I think, that the Tories are getting it wrong. Well, if they're getting it wrong in England, it's perfectly possible for us to consider they may be getting it wrong in Scotland. He will. He will.
Brian Whittle.
Thank Mr Stevenson for taking his intervention. In saying that perhaps we would take a different position to what's happening down south, Mr Stevenson conceded that perhaps you might be getting it wrong up here.
Stewart Stevenson.
I'm rarely accused of getting it wrong and never admit. No, that of course is not true. I will always look at the evidence, but the evidence here is that, like Maureen Watt, I have not had a single constituent contact me on this subject. This is not the talk of the steamy. Among those for whom this matters, the pupils and the parents. It simply isn't. So that's the kind of evidence that I have to say is driving me. I have to say, some of the debate has said that children at the age of 4, 5, 6 shouldn't be exposed to computers. Well, I have to say, I spent 30 years working in computers, but I find most 6-year-olds are more adept at working their tablet than I am. So I don't think that's a particularly credible argument. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, just one or two things. Even in Denmark, local government wants to introduce statutory testing for 3-year-olds in kindergarten. There are many different ways of looking at this problem, and I'm very happy to support the Scottish Government's approach. Finally, testing is important. Would you let a driver in the road without a driver's test?